Zekthara stood on the bridge of the coalition ship Stellar Harmony, watching the stars through the wide viewing window. His scaled hands rested on the control panel as he studied the information on his screen. The distress signal had come from a human colony world called Kepler 442b. 3 days of travel, and now they were almost there. The Velthari warrior had served in many missions like this. Pirates, raiders, natural disasters. The coalition helped whoever needed it. But this was his first time working directly with humans. He had heard stories about them, of course. Every species in the galaxy had stories about humans. "Sir, we're getting a response from the planet," said the communications officer, a blue-skinned Zephyrian named Kolta. "Put it through," Zekthara replied. The screen flickered and a human face appeared. The man looked tired, with dirt on his face and worry in his eyes. His hair was brown and cut short, military style. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Human Defense Force on Kepler 442b, the man said. "Thank you for responding to our call. We need help badly." Zekthara stepped forward. "I am Zekthara of the Velthari military. What is your situation, Captain Morrison?" "The Kethvar swarm hit us 3 days ago," Morrison said. "They came out of nowhere. We've got about 2,000 civilians trapped in different parts of the colony. My people are holding defensive positions, but we can't get to everyone." The Kethvar. Zekthara's scales darkened with concern. The swarm was one of the worst enemies in this part of the galaxy. They were like insects, but smart and mean. They worked together perfectly and never stopped attacking until everything was dead. "How many Kethvar?" Zekthara asked. "Best guess? Maybe 10,000. They've taken most of the city. We're holed up in the underground areas with whatever people we could save." Zekthara did quick math in his head. The Stellar Harmony carried about 500 coalition troops from different species. The humans had maybe 300 soldiers left. Against 10,000 Kethvar, those were not good numbers. "We'll be in orbit in 2 hours, Zekthara said. "Send us your defensive positions and civilian locations. We'll work together to get your people out." Morrison nodded. "Thank you. I'll have Lieutenant Amy Carter send you everything we have. She's our tactical officer." The screen went dark. Zekthara turned to his own tactical officer, a tall Andromedian named Velos. "What do you think?" Zekthara asked. "The humans have a reputation for being tough," Velos said, "but this is a bad situation. Maybe we should call for more ships, and that would take weeks. Those civilians don't have weeks." Zekthara had read about humans in the Coalition database. They were described as persistent and adaptable. Their technology was good, but not amazing. Their soldiers were well trained, but not the best in the galaxy. They seemed like decent allies, but nothing special. 2 hours later, the Stellar Harmony was in orbit around Kepler 442b. The planet looked beautiful from space: blue oceans, green land, white clouds. But Zekthara could see the dark smoke rising from the main colony city. "Incoming message from the surface," Kolta said. This time, a human woman appeared on the screen. She had blonde hair pulled back and sharp blue eyes. Her uniform was clean and neat even in the middle of a war. "I'm Lieutenant Amy Carter," she said. "I'm sending you our current tactical situation now." Data flowed across Zekthara's screens. The humans had done good work. Their maps were detailed and accurate. They knew exactly where the Kethvar were, where their own people were, and what the best approach routes would be. "Impressive work, Lieutenant," Zekthara said. "Thank you, sir. We've identified 17 civilian groups that need immediate evacuation. The largest group is about 400 people, including many children, trapped in the eastern residential area." Children. Zekthara noticed how Carter's voice changed slightly when she said that word. Humans seemed to care a lot about their young ones, more than most species did. "We'll start landing troops in 30 minutes, Zekthara said. "My people will set up a command post near your position. We can coordinate from there." "Understood. Sergeant Ben Rodriguez will meet your landing teams. He knows the underground tunnels better than anyone." The first landing shuttles went down an hour later. Zekthara was on the second wave, along with his personal combat team. The trip down was bumpy. The Kethvar were shooting at anything that moved in the sky. The landing zone was in a wide tunnel about 50 feet underground. Emergency lights cast strange shadows on the concrete walls. The air smelled like recycled oxygen and fear. A human soldier was waiting for them. He was shorter than Zekthara, but built like a rock. His dark hair was starting to go gray, and his eyes were calm and steady. "Sergeant Ben Rodriguez," the human said, holding out his hand. Zekthara shook it. Humans liked this greeting ritual. Zekthara Velthari Military. Welcome to our little war, Rodriguez said with a slight smile. Come on, I'll show you what we're dealing with. They walked through tunnels filled with humans. Zekthara saw families sitting together, children playing quiet games, old people sleeping on makeshift beds. Everyone looked scared but not panicked. The humans were keeping good discipline. How long can you hold out down here? Zekthara asked. Food and water? Maybe 2 weeks. But that's not the real problem. Rodriguez stopped at a heavy metal door. The real problem is up there. He opened the door and they climbed stairs to ground level. Rodriguez carefully opened another door and Zekthara got his first look at the colony city. It was a mess. Buildings were broken and burning. Strange web-like structures covered many of the intact buildings, Kethvar nests. In the distance, Zekthara could see the insect-like aliens moving in organized groups. They're not just trying to kill us, Rodriguez said quietly. They're setting up to stay. This isn't a raid, it's an invasion. Zekthara studied the scene through his tactical scope. The Kethvar had indeed set up permanent positions. This would be harder than he thought. Your people trapped out there, he said. How long before the Kethvar find them? Rodriguez's jaw tightened. Some of them. Maybe days, others. He pointed to a group of buildings in the distance. There's a school there. 300 civilians, including about 60 kids. The Kethvar are already surrounding that area. Maybe hours, Zekthara nodded. Time was running out. But he had confidence in coalition tactics. They would get these people out. He had no idea that everything he thought he knew about humans was about to change. The command center was set up in what used to be the colony's main meeting hall. Now it was underground, lit by portable lights and filled with maps, screens, and radio equipment. Zekthara watched the humans work and found himself impressed by their organization. Captain Morrison stood at the center table, pointing at different locations on a large map. Around him, human and coalition officers shared information and made plans. Everyone seemed to know their job. The school is our biggest problem, Morrison was saying. 300 people, including children, and the Kethvar are closing in fast. What about the residential tower? Asked Colonel Ryan Hayes, the colony's defense commander. Hayes was older than Morrison, with gray hair and scars on his hands. He had the look of someone who had seen many battles. 42 people trapped on the upper floors, replied Lieutenant Carter, reading from her tablet. The Kethvar control the lower levels, but they haven't found the civilians yet. Zekthara studied the map. In his experience, rescue missions like this were about making hard choices. You saved who you could and accepted that you couldn't save everyone. It was sad but practical. We should prioritize by numbers, he suggested. Hit the school first, then the residential area, then the smaller groups. The humans looked at him with strange expressions. Morrison shook his head. We're getting everyone out, he said simply. Captain, with respect, that may not be possible. Zekthara replied. The numbers are against us. We should focus on saving the most people we can. All of them is the most people we can, said a new voice. Zekthara turned to see a human woman in medical gear. She was small with dark hair and tired eyes, but her voice was firm. Corporal Katie Sullivan, she said, introducing herself. I've been treating wounded from the outer settlements. Every person out there has a name, has family. We don't leave people behind. Zekthara was puzzled. This attitude was not practical. In his military training, commanders had to make hard decisions. You couldn't save everyone in every situation. What's your standard procedure for civilian evacuation? He asked Morrison. Everyone gets out, Morrison said again. That's not a procedure. That's a promise. Over the next few hours, Zekthara watched the humans plan. They made detailed maps of every building. They calculated exact timing for each rescue. They found ways to reach places that seemed impossible to reach. A young human soldier named Danny Walsh was working on communication equipment. He looked barely old enough to fight, with red hair and freckles, but his hands were steady as he adjusted the radio settings. Got contact with the school, Walsh announced. They're okay for now, but the Kethvar are getting closer. What about the Peterson family in Sector 7? Asked Dr. Nathan Brooks, the colony administrator. He was a thin man who looked like he spent more time with books than weapons, but he was keeping track of every civilian. Still no response, Walsh replied. But that doesn't mean they're gone. Could just be radio problems. Zekthara noticed how the humans talked about the trapped people. They used names, not numbers. The Peterson family, old Mrs. Chen who lived alone. the Johnson kids who were visiting from Earth. Each person mattered to them individually. "This is not efficient," he said to Rodriguez during a break. The sergeant was cleaning his rifle, checking each part carefully. "What do you mean? Your people spend too much time on individuals. In war you think about groups, about numbers. It's more logical." Rodriguez stopped working and looked at him. "You got family, Zekthara?" "I have a mate and 2 offspring on my homeworld. Someone came for them. Would you want their rescuers thinking about numbers?" Zekthara didn't have a good answer for that. The first rescue mission went out that evening. It was a small group, just 20 people trapped in a medical clinic. Coalition and human soldiers worked together, moving through tunnels and sewers to reach the building. Zekthara went with them, curious to see how humans fought. The operation went smoothly. The Kethvar had guards around the building, but the combined force took them out quietly. The civilians were scared but unharmed. What surprised Zekthara was what happened after. The rescued people were brought back to the command center, and he watched every human in the area stop what they were doing to welcome them. There were hugs, tears, and smiles. People asked about specific individuals by name. "How's your daughter feeling?" Katie Sullivan asked an older man. "Is your restaurant okay?" Someone asked a woman with flour still on her apron. "Did you see the Williams family? Are they safe?" It was not like military operations, Zekthara knew. Usually you completed the mission and moved on to the next one. These humans acted like every rescue was personal. "Strange customs," he said to Lieutenant Carter. She was updating her tactical display with new information. "What's strange about caring for people?" "It's inefficient. Emotional investment interferes with logical decision-making." Carter paused and looked at him. "Maybe, but it's also why we fight." That night, Zekthara couldn't sleep. He walked through the underground shelter observing. The humans had organized everything well. There were areas for families, medical stations, even a small space where children could play quietly. He stopped to watch a group of kids playing with simple toys. Their parents watched them with careful eyes, ready to move at the first sign of danger, but they let the children play. Even here, even now, they tried to keep some normalcy. An old human woman approached him. She had white hair and wrinkled hands, but her eyes were bright. "You're one of the aliens helping us," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I am Zekthara. I'm Martha Lewis. Thank you for coming." "It is our duty," he replied formally. She smiled. "Maybe for you. For them?" She gestured at the human soldiers. "It's more than duty. My grandson Danny is out there somewhere. Those boys and girls are going to find him no matter what it takes." "You are certain of this?" "Honey, I've lived through 3 wars. I've seen what humans do when their people are threatened. It's not always pretty, but it's always thorough." There was something in her voice that made Zekthara pay attention. The old woman spoke like she knew secrets. "What do you mean?" he asked. Martha Lewis looked at him for a long moment. "You seem like a good sort. Just remember what you've seen so far. This is us being polite. Pray you never see us when we stop being polite." She walked away, leaving Zekthara confused. The humans seemed emotional and inefficient, but not particularly dangerous. They followed rules, worried about civilians, tried to minimize damage. If anything, they seemed too gentle for serious warfare. He returned to the command center, where Morrison and Hayes were planning the next day's operations. "The school has to be tomorrow," Morrison was saying. "We're running out of time." "It's going to be tough," Hayes replied. "The Kethvar have that whole area locked down tight." "We'll manage," Morrison said simply. Zekthara joined them at the map table. "What's the plan?" "Direct assault," Hayes said. "Fast and hard. Get in, get the people, get out. The Kethvar will fight for every building," Zekthara warned. "It will be costly." Morrison's expression didn't change. "Then it will be costly. But those kids are coming home." Something in the captain's voice reminded Zekthara of Martha Lewis's warning. There was steel underneath the politeness, something hard and determined. Maybe there was more to humans than he had first thought. The attack on the underground shelter came at dawn. Zekthara was in the command center when the alarm started screaming. The lights flickered as explosions shook dust from the ceiling. Through the radio, he could hear soldiers shouting about breaches in sectors 4 and 7. "They found us," Morrison said, his voice calm but tight. "Rodriguez, how bad is it?" "Bad," came the sergeant's voice through static. "They're coming through the old maintenance tunnels. Looks like a full assault force." Zekthara grabbed his weapon and followed Morrison toward the fighting. The underground passages were filled with smoke and the sound of gunfire. Coalition soldiers and humans worked together, setting up defensive lines and moving civilians to safer areas. But the Kethvar were fast and smart. They had found weak points in the shelter's defenses and were pushing through in multiple places at once. "Fall back to checkpoint 7, Carter's voice came over the radio. "They've broken through the eastern tunnel." Zekthara fought alongside human marines, impressed by their discipline under pressure. They covered each other well, moved efficiently, and didn't panic even when the bug-like aliens came at them in waves. But there were too many Kethvar, and they were in too many places at once. "Civilians are trapped in Section 12, Rodriguez reported. The bugs got between them and the evacuation route. Zekthara could see the tactical situation clearly. They were being overrun. The smart thing would be to evacuate the main group and accept the loss of the trapped civilians. It was horrible, but it was logical. "Captain," he said to Morrison, "we need to consider pulling back to the secondary shelter. We can save most of the people." Morrison looked at him like he had suggested something impossible. "We're not leaving anyone." "Sir, the tactical situation—" "I don't care about the tactical situation." Morrison's voice was still calm, but something underneath it had changed. "No one gets left behind." The fighting continued for 2 hours. Zekthara found himself retreating through tunnels he had walked safely just the day before. The Kethvar seemed to be everywhere, their insect-like clicking filling the air. Then came the radio call that changed everything. "Command, this is Walsh," came Danny's young voice, full of fear. "They got through to the civilian area. They've taken hostages." Morrison stopped moving. "How many?" "Looks like 30 people, sir, including—" Danny's voice broke slightly. "Including the Miller family. They got the kids." Silence fell over the command channel. Zekthara looked around and saw something he had never seen before. Every human in sight had gone completely still. Not frozen with fear, still like predators. "Danny, where are they taking the hostages?" Morrison asked. His voice was different now, quieter, colder. "Toward the surface, sir. Looks like they're heading for the main colony area." Zekthara had read about the Miller family in the civilian reports. Tom Miller worked in colony maintenance. His wife Grace taught at the school they had been trying to reach. They had 2 children, a boy about 8 years old and a girl who was maybe 5. "All units, this is Morrison," came the captain's voice over the radio. "New priority. Those civilians are not reaching the surface. Whatever it takes." Lieutenant Carter appeared at Zekthara's shoulder. She was checking her weapon with movements that seemed somehow more precise than before. "What's the plan?" Zekthara asked. Carter looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his scales tighten with worry. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were like winter. "The plan is simple," she said. "We get our people back. And the Kethvar." "What about them?" There was something in the way she said it that made Zekthara realize the humans were no longer thinking about the Kethvar as an enemy to fight. They were thinking about them as a problem to solve. The rescue force assembled quickly. Morrison, Carter, Rodriguez, and 20 of their best soldiers. Zekthara and a squad of his own people joined them. But as they prepared to move out, he noticed the humans were doing things differently now. They were checking weapons he hadn't seen before. Military gear that looked more serious than anything they had used in the previous fighting. Rodriguez was handing out ammunition that Zekthara didn't recognize. "What kind of rounds are those?" he asked. "The kind that work," Rodriguez replied simply. Corporal Sullivan was also gearing up despite being a medic. "I'm going with you," she told Morrison. "Katie, we need you here for the wounded." "Those kids might need medical attention," she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands were checking a sidearm with practiced ease. "I'm going." Young Danny Walsh approached Morrison with a determined expression. "Sir, request permission to join the rescue team." "Danny, you're staying here. Captain, my sister lives in that colony. If the bugs are taking prisoners to the surface—" Morrison studied the young soldier's face, then nodded. "Gear up." As they moved through the tunnels toward the surface, Zekthara noticed how the humans were moving differently. Before, they had been careful, methodical, following proper military procedures. Now they moved like they were hunting. "Contact ahead," whispered Rodriguez from the front of the group. Through his scope, Zekthara could see the Kethvar column, about 50 of the insect-like aliens with the human prisoners in the middle. The captives were tied together and looked terrified. He could see the Miller children clinging to their parents. Standard rescue protocol calls for negotiation. First, Zekthara said quietly. Morrison looked at him with an expression that was perfectly calm and absolutely terrifying. There's nothing to negotiate, the captain said. Carter was studying the scene through her own scope. 47 hostiles. Civilians are bunched in the center. Crossfire risk is high. Then we don't use crossfire, Morrison replied. Rodriguez, take your team left. Carter, take the right flank. Danny, you're with me on the center approach. What about suppression fire and covering positions? Zekthara asked. We don't need covering positions, Rodriguez said simply. We're not planning to miss. As they moved into position, Zekthara began to understand what Martha Lewis had meant. The humans weren't being polite anymore. They weren't following standard procedures or worrying about proper military protocol. They were doing whatever it took to get their people back. The attack, when it came, was unlike anything Zekthara had ever seen. The humans didn't charge or make noise or try to intimidate the enemy. They simply appeared and started killing Kethvar with mechanical precision. Morrison's shot took out the lead alien before it even knew they were there. Carter's team eliminated the right flank in seconds. Rodriguez and his Marines moved through the left side like they were harvesting crops. Zekthara fired his own weapon, but he was mostly watching in amazement. The humans weren't fighting like soldiers anymore. They were fighting like something else entirely. In less than 3 minutes, it was over. All the Kethvar were dead. The prisoners were safe. But as Zekthara helped untie the civilians, he realized this was just the beginning. Because Morrison was standing over the dead aliens with an expression that said this was nowhere near enough. Captain, Carter said quietly, we've got traces of more Kethvar heading toward the main colony. Looks like they're setting up some kind of processing center. Processing for what? Unknown. But sir, there might be more prisoners. Morrison nodded slowly. When he looked up at his team, Zekthara saw something that made him understand why other species whispered when they talked about humans. Then we go get them too, Morrison said. All of them. And Zekthara realized that the humans were no longer thinking about rescue missions or tactical situations or acceptable losses. They were thinking about war. The assault on the main colony began at sunset. Zekthara had seen many battles in his military career, but nothing like this. The humans had spent 6 hours planning, and their plan was not like any military operation he knew. It was more like an extermination. Intelligence shows the Kethvar have set up processing centers in 3 locations. Carter briefed the combined force. They're collecting prisoners from across the planet. We estimate 200 humans in total. Morrison stood at the center of the planning table, but he looked different now. His uniform was the same, his rank was the same, but something fundamental had changed. When he spoke, other humans listened with the attention usually reserved for orders from high command. We hit all 3 locations simultaneously, Morrison said. No survivors among the Kethvar. No exceptions. Zekthara was disturbed by those words. In coalition warfare, enemies who surrendered were supposed to be taken prisoner. There were rules about treatment of defeated forces. Captain, he said carefully, what about prisoners of war protocols? Every human in the room looked at him. The silence stretched uncomfortably. The Kethvar don't take prisoners, Rodriguez said quietly. They take food. Zekthara felt his scales go cold. He had heard rumors about what the swarm did to captured beings, but he had hoped they were just stories. The processing centers aren't prisons, Carter added, her voice completely flat. They're kitchens. Young Danny Walsh was checking his weapon with movements that seemed too skilled for someone his age. My sister was in the northern settlement when they hit, he said. If she's still alive, she's in one of those centers. She's alive, Morrison said with absolute certainty. And we're bringing her home. Zekthara looked around the room and realized that something had fundamentally changed in how the humans saw this conflict. It was no longer a rescue mission or even a battle. It had become something else entirely. The first target was a large building that used to be a food distribution center. The Kethvar had converted it into their main processing facility. Through his scope, Zekthara could see dozens of the insect-like aliens moving around the structure. Some were standing guard. Others were carrying things he didn't want to think about. 63 hostiles, Carter reported. Motion sensors show 42 prisoners inside, ground floor, northeastern corner. Approach routes? Morrison asked. 3 main entrances plus service tunnels. Standard protocol would be to secure the perimeter first. then move in carefully to avoid civilian casualties. Morrison was quiet for a moment, studying the building. When he spoke, his voice was calm and certain. New protocol. Rodriguez, take your team through the service tunnels. Secure the prisoners first. Everyone else, we're going through the front door. Sir, Zekthara said. A direct assault could alert the other facilities. They might kill the prisoners at the other locations. They won't have time, Morrison replied. The attack began exactly at sunset. Zekthara was with Morrison's group as they approached the main entrance. He expected careful advancement, suppressing fire, tactical maneuvering. Instead, Morrison simply walked up to the front door and shot the first Kethvar he saw. What followed was not a battle. It was a methodical elimination. The humans moved through the building like they owned it. They didn't take cover or call out warnings or try to minimize damage. They found Kethvar and killed them, moving from room to room with mechanical efficiency. Zekthara tried to keep up, but he found himself mostly watching in amazement. Carter appeared around corners and took perfect shots. Rodriguez's team moved through the service areas like they could see through walls. Even young Danny fought with a skill that spoke of training far beyond his apparent age. Building secure, Rodriguez reported over the radio. 42 prisoners recovered. All alive. Casualties? Morrison asked. None among the civilians. None among our people. Kethvar survivors? None. The second facility fell in the same way. The third took slightly longer, but only because it was bigger. By the time the sun had fully set, all 3 processing centers were empty of Kethvar, and all the prisoners were safe. But the humans weren't done. Satellite scan shows Kethvar concentration in the central plaza, Carter reported. Looks like their main command structure. How many? Morrison asked. 2,000, maybe more. It's their entire remaining force on the planet. Zekthara expected the humans to call for reinforcements, or at least to wait for better tactical conditions. 2,000 enemies was a significant force. Even for their combined coalition and human troops, all teams, converge on the central plaza, Morrison ordered. Sir, Zekthara said, perhaps we should wait for— No waiting. Morrison cut him off. They came to our world. They took our people. They're not leaving. The central plaza had once been a beautiful park in the heart of the colony. Now it was covered with Kethvar nests and swarming with the insect-like aliens. They had clearly set it up as their main base of operations. Standard siege tactics would take days, Zekthara observed. We don't have days, Rodriguez said. He was setting up some kind of equipment that Zekthara didn't recognize. We finish this tonight. Katie Sullivan was preparing medical supplies, but she was also checking weapons with the same careful attention. Those things came here thinking they could just take what they wanted, she said quietly. Time to teach them they were wrong. The assault on the plaza was unlike anything in Zekthara's military experience. The humans didn't use standard tactics or follow normal procedures. They used everything. Morrison's artillery strikes were precise enough to take out specific nests without damaging nearby buildings. Carter coordinated air support that appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. Rodriguez led ground teams that seemed to know exactly where every Kethvar would be before the aliens themselves knew. But it was more than just superior tactics. The humans fought with an intensity that made Zekthara understand why other species found them frightening. They didn't just want to win, they wanted to make sure this never happened again. Contact right, Danny called out as a group of Kethvar tried to flank their position. Zekthara turned to help, but Danny was already handling it. The young human moved with practiced ease, taking down aliens that were bigger and stronger than he was. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just deadly competence. How old are you? Zekthara asked when the immediate threat was over. 19, Danny replied, reloading his weapon without looking away from the battlefield. When did you learn to fight like this? Danny looked at him with surprise. Every human learns to fight. We have to. But you're just a communications specialist. I'm a human, Danny said simply. We're all soldiers when we need to be. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the central plaza was quiet. The Kethvar were gone, not retreated, not regrouped, but gone. Eliminated with a thoroughness that made Zekthara realize why the galaxy's databases contained warnings about threatening human civilians. Morrison stood in the center of the plaza, surrounded by his people. His uniform was dirty and torn, but his expression was satisfied. All Teams report, he said into his radio. Sector 1 clear, came Rodriguez's voice. Sector 2 clear, reported. Carter, Sector 3 clear, added Sullivan. One by one the reports came in. Every HFY force on the planet had been found and eliminated. Every human prisoner had been recovered alive. The colony was free. Sir, Zekthara said to Morrison, how did you know you could do this? Morrison looked at him with an expression that was tired but not surprised. Because they threatened our families, he said simply, and that's not something humans allow. Standing in the ruins of the HFY invasion, Zekthara finally understood what he had witnessed. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had demonstrated something that made him grateful they were allies and not enemies. When humans decided something was unacceptable, they didn't just fight against it, they erased it. 3 days after the battle, Zekthara watched Dr. Katie Sullivan bandaging the wounds of a captured HFY. The insect-like alien had been found injured in the ruins of the plaza, apparently missed during the fighting. Now it lay on a medical table in the colony's restored hospital, receiving the same careful treatment as human patients. Why are you helping it? Zekthara asked. Sullivan looked up from her work. Her hands were gentle as she checked the alien's broken limb. Because it's hurt, she said simply. 3 days ago, you were killing its kind. 3 days ago, they were threatening our people. She finished the bandage and made notes on a medical chart. Now they're not, Zekthara was confused. The same humans who had eliminated the HFY invasion with ruthless efficiency were now providing medical care to their former enemies. It didn't make sense. He walked through the colony trying to understand what he had witnessed. The place was being rebuilt with the same methodical efficiency the humans had shown in battle. Buildings were being repaired, systems were being restored, and life was returning to normal. In the central plaza where the final battle had taken place, human children were playing again. Their parents watched them carefully, but they were allowing them to play. The transition from total war to peaceful normalcy seemed to happen overnight. Captain Morrison was in the temporary command center, filing reports. He looked tired but relaxed, like the intensity of the past few days had simply been switched off. How do you do it? Zekthara asked him. Do what? Change so completely. 3 days ago you were different. Dangerous, now you're back to being diplomatic and careful. Morrison considered the question, because the threat is over. We do what we have to do when we have to do it. When we don't have to do it anymore, we stop. But the capacity is still there. Yes, Morrison said simply. It's always there. Zekthara had spent the past 3 days writing his report for Velthari Command. It was the most difficult report he had ever written, because he wasn't sure his superiors would believe what he had seen. Lieutenant Carter found him in the communications center that evening. She was back to her normal professional demeanor, but Zekthara now knew what lay underneath it. I read your preliminary report, she said. You described us as extremely dangerous when motivated by threat to civilians. That seemed accurate. It is. But you also wrote that we're reliable allies under normal circumstances. Also accurate. Carter sat down across from him. Most species find that combination disturbing. They want their allies to be either peaceful or warlike, not both. I'm beginning to understand why. The thing is, Carter said, we don't see it as a contradiction. Protecting what we care about is the point of everything else. All the diplomacy, all the laws, all the civilization, it's all there to protect our families and our communities. And when those protections fail, then we fall back on older methods. That evening, Zekthara attended a celebration in the colony's main hall. The rescued prisoners had been reunited with their families, and the entire community was together for the first time since the invasion. He watched Tom and Grace Miller with their children. The family looked completely normal, laughing, talking, enjoying the simple fact of being alive and together. It was hard to believe they had been at the center of events that led to the complete elimination of an enemy force. Young Danny Walsh was there too, with his sister who had been rescued from one of the processing centers. She was maybe 16 years old with the same red hair as her brother. They were talking quietly, and Zekthara could see the relief in both their faces. Danny's a good kid, said a voice behind him. Zekthara turned to see Sergeant Rodriguez approaching, with 2 cups of something that smelled like coffee. He fought well, Zekthara said. He did what he had to do, same as all of us. Rodriguez handed him one of the cups. You look confused about something. I'm trying to understand how your people can be so gentle now, after what I saw during the fighting. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, watching the families around them. You have kids, right? Yes. What would you do if someone threatened them? I would fight to protect them. Would you stop fighting when they were safe? Of course, Rodriguez nodded. That's all we did. The only difference is we're very good at fighting when we need to be, but the complete elimination of the enemy force was necessary to make sure they couldn't threaten anyone else's kids. Rodriguez's voice was matter-of-fact. The Kethvar don't negotiate, don't retreat, don't learn. The only way to stop them permanently was to stop them permanently. Later that night, Zekthara found himself alone with his thoughts. He had been part of many military operations, but none that had affected him like this one. Watching the humans switch from peaceful cooperation to total warfare and back again had changed his understanding of what sentient beings were capable of. His final report would be read by Velthari Military Command, Coalition Leadership, and eventually by Diplomatic Corps across the galaxy. What he wrote would influence how other species viewed humanity for generations to come. He decided to be completely honest. Humans, he wrote, are not naturally aggressive. They prefer cooperation, negotiation, and peaceful solutions to problems. Their default state is diplomatic and reasonable. They follow rules, respect treaties, and work well with other species. However, when their families and communities are threatened, humans undergo a complete transformation. They become focused, efficient, and utterly ruthless in eliminating threats. They do not negotiate with enemies who harm civilians. They do not accept partial victories when total victory is possible. They do not stop until the threat is completely eliminated. The key to understanding humans is recognizing that their peaceful nature exists because they are strong enough to choose peace. When peace fails to protect what they value, they abandon it without hesitation or regret. Recommendation: humans make excellent allies and should be treated with respect and friendship. However, under no circumstances should other species threaten human families or communities. Humans have the capacity for total warfare, and they will use it when they believe it is necessary. Personal note: I have fought beside many species, but I have never seen anything like human protective fury. It is not rage or anger or hatred. It is cold, calculating, and absolutely unstoppable. I am grateful that humans generally choose to use this capacity only when protecting others, because I cannot imagine any force that could stand against it when fully unleashed. 2 weeks later, Zekthara was back aboard the Stellar Harmony, preparing to return to Coalition space. Captain Morrison came aboard to see him off personally. Thank you for your help, Morrison said. We couldn't have saved everyone without your people. Thank you for the education, Zekthara replied. I learned much about humans. Good things, I hope. Zekthara considered that. Important things. Your species is more complex than our databases indicated. Morrison smiled. Most species are once you get to know them. As the Coalition ship prepared to depart, Zekthara took one last look at the colony through the viewing port. The place looked peaceful and normal, with families going about their daily lives. Children played in parks, adults worked in gardens, and the community functioned with the quiet efficiency of a civilization at peace. But now he knew what lay underneath that peaceful surface. He had seen what humans became when that peace was threatened. He had witnessed the fury that lay dormant in every human heart, waiting to be awakened by the right provocation. It was a lesson he would never forget, and one that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever, because now they knew. Humans were not just another peaceful species trying to get along in a dangerous universe. They were peaceful by choice, not by nature, and when they chose to stop being peaceful, they became something that even the Kethvar swarm could not survive. The galaxy was a safer place with humans in it, Zekthara realized, but only as long as everyone remembered to treat them with the respect that their true nature demanded. He had fought beside humans and seen their true fury. He had also seen their true mercy, and he understood finally that both came from the same source: their absolute commitment to protecting what they loved.